It's important first to say that like the work of UCC's or Urban Core Collective's education justice work is not my story alone. There's lots of people involved here.
That's right.
But I am going to kind of map my personal experience onto how this has had come into being because I do think that our ed justice work seeks to be representative of a lot of people's experiences, right? And to account for those. So I had been working at a local nonprofit here in Grand Rapids in education for a while, doing advocacy work. So when I talk about that, like going to decision makers on behalf of somebody else and asking them for a different outcome. And it was case by case student led advocacy. Predominantly Black students would call a hotline if they are having issues with a suspension or with their special ed IEP, individualized education plan or something like that. And we had advocates that we would deploy to these meetings to help essentially advocate on behalf of the families and the students. So I was doing this kind of work. It was really rewarding in the sense that I got to know a lot of people's families. It was really frustrating in the sense that we very rarely achieved the outcomes that we desired within systems that were not designed to support students and families in the ways that we were hoping for. That became a big source of frustration for me as I did this work was like, students and parents need this, but we're not actually changing anything. It felt like harm reduction work, right? We're trying to remove these systems, but without actually changing the systems themselves, which is a big part of the harm reduction theory of change, right? That experience was really frustrating for me. So and I knew that I was coming back from school. The sense that I had was like, we need to do something that's going to address the system. And my experience in the organizational landscape of Grand Rapids around education specifically was that most folks were not building power to change the system. They were doing similar work what we were doing, like harm reduction within the system. That could look like tutoring, right? That could look like sort of services. Or they were maybe doing high level advocacy work, which I say is like pushing specific policies or things like that, that they thought would have a net trickle down effect. But what was absent was true sort of community based power building that's rooted in a few things. One, it's rooted in a sense of self-determination that many people actually have really good ideas of what they want public systems to look like and feel like and do, including education systems. Right. And that was when we went in and asked people, it was really not, it was sort of like we call them now the essentials of a healthy and healing school. Kids can get to school on time. They have teachers in their classrooms, right? The schools themselves are clean and safe from like an air quality perspective. We just gotten off of COVID at the time. The food that they were eating was appetizing and healthy and culturally responsive, fit a very diverse student body. And last but not least, that there was mental health supports in place for schools as they navigate adolescence, right? Who would have thought that adolescence is a time when we need some well-placed adults to help us navigate all the
Ooh,
changes that are happening in our bodies, right? These five things, essentials of a healthy and healing school. Is like people were really clear on what they wanted. But why was that? The school system set up to be able to provide that in the way that we wanted to. And when we just asked for it, we were met with all kinds of excuses and refusals from the system. And I don't want to broadly paint all the actors within our public systems as bad actors that people exist within. But the very notion that the people in a democratic system can tell you what they want and that you can just say, no, we're either not going to do that or we can't do that was like, this was right. And I think we talked about this notion that we live in a representative democracy. For a lot of people, already they feel like, wow, that's not true. They don't listen to
yeah.
me. Like, voter turnout numbers are so low. There's lots of ways we can gauge that. But this proved to folks in a different kind of way that even when we get together and tell them what we asked for, and they're not willing to give it to us. So what are we then left with, right? And for us, that really came down to we got to make them give us what we want and need.
Yeah.
And it pushed us then towards thinking about power building. And I just want to draw the connection here. Us doing that is incredibly unharmonious, right? If anything, it's downright taking a position of being antagonistic at times towards systems. Not to say that we want to tear all of them down and none of them work or anything, but like this antagonism is it was rooted in a deep love, a deep desire for them to function in different ways. But the end product here is very contentious. It's not this peace, love, work,
Hmm.
vision of multicultural society kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's
Going
us
back to some of your
duking it
earlier
out.
points. Yeah. It's not this
Exactly.
neat and clean. Yeah. Everybody is not aligned on what
Right.
the end
So
should be.
so we're pushing right now, right? We decided, okay, we need to go and build community power. So we started organizing, community organizing with students, with parents, with building level staff, right? To say like, this is what y'all want, but we're not getting that. How do we force them to give us what we want, even when they don't want to? And that's really been the mantra that we've been using is these things are basic rights. Education is a basic right for us. This is a guaranteed thing by our government, but it's not functioning the way that we need it to. And our systems of asking it to feel broken. We talked about earlier this idea representative democracy in a lot of ways is
Yes.
already a fallacy.
Yes.
We can elect school board members, but then we're in this condition now where it's like, okay, we have elected school board members, but an appointed governance body, right? And a superintendent. And uh, um, school board members have quite little power in comparison with a superintendent, or in the case of city government here in Grand Rapids, a city manager, right? Your city council versus your city manager. And so already there's lots of ways in which our power has been diffused, even within the context of our elected democracy. And so our really thing was like, how do we bring our power back? And that requires the work of building power. And I
Mm.
think that's the journey that we're on right now is like, how do we continue to build power rooted in our values? And, UCC is a racial justice organization. So really prioritizing who we're building power with and for, but also prioritizing and uplifting the wisdom that those communities have in terms of what we want the thing to look like, right? And being able to root our energy and work in their desires, and do the work of fleshing out what those desires, right? Because different people have different ideas about stuff. A lot of our work is around like taking the time to do sense making around stuff as a group and creating, generating buy-in, or being willing to say, you know what, I don't see it yet, but maybe my thing can come later,
Yeah.
give us what we want, even when they don't want to. Um, and doing that by really honoring the experiences that people have, the desires that they have for their selves and their families, in the case of schools, particularly for their kids, and moving forward from a value orientation that says, yeah, everybody here matters, and everybody's voice is important.
And I know you can speak to that more than I can, but I've seen in different ways. Hey, you all getting the word out. Hey, this meeting is coming up. This policy is coming up.
That's right.
Here's what it is. Let's share with you. Here's what's on the thing. Give us feedback. What are some of the how are you feeling about this? Is this what you actually want? And taking that information and bringing it to the folks when those decisions are made. Just as you're describing these things, I'm just thinking in the different ways that I've seen that happen from you all coming out of the work that you're doing. That is, like you said, trying to get that buy-in or just building community, building power. And so as you're talking, the statement that has never left me from my early work and connection with you, and some of the others at UCC is people are capable of solving their own problems given the right conditions. And one of those conditions is being listened to, getting those resources that they already know that they need. And I've just really appreciated your storytelling around some of the ways that you're building powers, the values that go into how you do that too.
Mhm.
So thank you for sharing that. What are some of the moments where you felt most engaged in your work with UCC's educational justice work? Just a moment, a memory, a time. What was happening and what made that moment so powerful for you? It could be sharing about a current struggle. It could be something that you've seen as a victory, but just a moment in time or moments, if you have them, that kind of resonate right now in this moment where you felt really engaged and passionate about UC's educational justice work. And again, like what was happening? What made that moment so powerful for you, or those moments so powerful for you?
It's a good question because I'm blessed that I feel like there are many, and it's hard to think about one. I think the big, like, direct actions when everybody turns out and gets mobilized, those ones always the shine. I want to situate my moment with students specifically. So some of our students planned and executed an action, a protest around teacher compensation. And you think of the complexity of a dynamic like this, right? Where you have a student body that's 80% people of color or students of color. You have a teaching force that's in Grand Rapids, I would say at least 90%, if not higher, white, right? There's an economic divide between those two, like a professional divide between those constituents. There's a lot of history issues with discipline in classrooms where students of color are disproportionately and stuff like that. So it's not an easy alliance to make. I say all
Yeah.
that to say, and yet our students, right? And these are students who come from pretty high performing schools, I will say, many of them, and they don't deal with the teacher shortage in the ways that their peers in lower performing high schools particularly are dealing with, right? They have the privilege of their educational experience feels secure in some ways. And yet they made this desire to say, you know what, in order for us to achieve this collective benefit for all of us, they do feel the teacher shortage a little bit, right? But in order for us to achieve this collective net benefit for all of our students, we actually have to put some stuff aside for now, right? It's tabled to say, nope, we need to stand in solidarity with the teacher union right now and be organizing and advocating for teacher compensation. It benefits us as students, right? And they had a whole narrative around why, but that narrative was really situated in like not their personal experience as like attending these higher performing high schools, right? But this sort of universal need for their peers. And so I think that really transformative thing for me in that process is these are students, these are like young folks, their vote, their perspectives, their insight, all of that kind of stuff. These are folks that are often considered not worthy of inputting into systems. And yet they're able to consciously, I think, stand in solidarity with both their peers who could be looked down on, right? Like they tested into these higher schools. There's like all kinds of stuff. And also looking past some of the differences that exist with the teachers union to say, no, we actually have to actively build power with y'all in order for us to achieve what we want, right? And then we'll figure out the relational complexities of our stuff down the road, right?
Mm.
Like, so there was like a really beautiful model, I think, put in place by young folks who
Yes.
did these moves really naturally. It wasn't like, it, and part of me is y'all haven't been indoctrinated in the anti-racist stuff,
I was just
right?
about to
Yeah.
ask you about
So it's
that.
like, it's
Yes.
almost a different orientation into how you're immersed, what your origin story pushes you towards doing, which a lot of their origin story has been involved in this organizing work that we've been doing, right? So there's just I think a beauty in, and I think that the offering here is to say, if you're feeling stuck in this work where you're like, I'm trying to build my consciousness. I'm trying to like be a good ally, doing all this kind of stuff. Maybe there's another step that you need to take that's going to set you up to be involved in a project in a different kind of way and give you space to move and work and stand in active solidarity with in a different kind of way than what you've been primed to think is like how you go about doing it. So I would say that's probably been my biggest highlight is to give all the young people the shout out of, man, and this came really pretty naturally. There's a lot of work involved in coming up with these things. I don't want to downplay that, but the connections that were being made for folks were like, oh yeah, this seems right. So let's go talk to the teachers union kind of thing. I was like, damn, all right, let's
All
do
right,
it.
let's do it.
You know?
Let's do it. Let's do it. But no, as I was listening, I also caught that and like you said, yes, it's a lot that goes into it. but at the same time thinking about, oh yeah, how naturally it came to them. And then my immediate internal question was like, huh, I wonder what's the difference? What happened? And then shortly after, I'm thinking this to myself, and then shortly after, you're like, hey, y'all hadn't been indoctrinated in some of
You're right.
the stuff. Like y'all haven't
Yeah.
been told that certain things
Yeah.
are impossible in the ways that some of the adults around us, around you may have been. And so this is,
Yeah.
I think, but there's something so powerful about that though, in that again, like you said, not diminishing any of the hard work, any of the conflict, the messiness that went into doing it, but mentioning that also this is them acting and seeing a very real need for their peers that they don't experience in the same way, but they're still having that value. And so there are questions around, all right, so again, what are some of the things that led them to see that value in that? Like, this isn't something that may impact me directly in these ways, but at the same time, I'm seeing a need for solidarity here, and we're going to act in, we're going to move towards that. And then also the way it was just like so natural. I know you said it, but it's just something so powerful about that, that I'm also hoping folks who are listening to this now will also catch that in a particular way too, that asks you to think about and ask yourself some questions, not only about your own origin stories, but then the folks that you are working with, particularly in working with young people. I also appreciate you elevating the fact that young folks are not often considered as their contributions are worthy in these decision making spaces. But as you're telling the story, but they did it so
Man.
seamlessly, so naturally. So like, why not? Yeah, let's go to the teachers union as you're describing that. There's just something so powerful about that to me as I listen to it, and I think within it, I think there's some messaging, again, that I'm hoping people reflect on. You're describing like, all right, so if you're feeling stuck, maybe there's some other ways that you can think about moving in different ways that, again, that might be different from the ways we've been primed to think. And so,
Yeah.
a big part of this project is recognizing that we do have the capacity to think outside of those status quos we've been given.
How do we get them to get us what we want, even if they don't want to? So a lot of these students started organizing around school food. And they realized, you know what? We don't have enough power on our own to make this case. How do we build student power? Then there was like, all right, how do we go and talk to these other students in other schools? And as they did, realizing like, oh, yo, food is not the biggest issue in these schools. It's they don't even got teachers. Give
Yeah,
food, they don't even got
yeah.
teachers. And so if we want to build power with these folks, we actually have to make sure that their needs are met. And so how do we do that then? We approach the teachers union and we're talking about teacher compensation now, right? And realizing that talking to the teachers union is also a power building activity. So these folks are still being driven by their own interests in terms of what they want to see happen. But the approach to it is much more collectivist
Mhm.
and much less about, oh, if I just have the right information and I can make the case to a decision maker, which is, I think,
Yeah,
the normative way of how we think about change happening,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
The harmonious way of change happening when it's, wow, man, we actually got to go out here and these alliances and whatnot may be messy and complicated as well. But we're out here doing this thing to build our power. And there's space for all of the interests at the table, right? Like we can create a society that serves the interests of everybody, that takes good care of everybody. Like it's possible, and we just have to do the work to figure that out.